it's hopeless when you think that you lost. Oh, I will take your hand and we'll rise up from the dust. Oh, here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for. This is what we know. Here we come back to life, we're still breathing. Standing up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on.
Hello, everyone. So this week we are going to talk about trauma. We're going to talk about, what is trauma? Why is it important to work with it? And so I'm just going to start by giving a quick definition, and it's a very general definition of what trauma is. Trauma is a deeply distressing and disturbing experience. Again, it's a very, very general definition, but I like it because it's kind of all encompassing. Some people think of trauma in terms of, on one end of the spectrum or the other. It can be really big, or it can be something that just kind of we hold in our body and we don't even realize it's there until we're put in a situation. So, so if I'm here with Mike and Kara, by the way. Hey guys.
Hi.
So yeah, if one of you just want to kind of get started and tell me, what is your definition of trauma? What do you think trauma is? How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can go first. So trauma for me is just sort of more of an understanding rather than a definition. I sort of like, and something I've learned over time. So I honestly, to be really honest, like that the term trauma is, I don't always feel like in alignment with that. I like the term wounding because number one, I'm a nurse. So trauma, for a nurse can be primarily physical, unless you're working with, it seems like the parts of the person can often be separate. So you might see a psychological trauma or physical trauma, such as like following a car accident or, banging your knee. There's like tissue trauma. So in my mind, like trauma can be sort of separating, but for like our purposes here and doing self-work, I think of trauma as wounding, which I think can look really different for every person. So, and I think another important thing about the idea of trauma or wounding is that it's not always that we're really aware of our own story or our own wounding. So I'm trying to think of an example of trauma, and I think it's important to recognize that it could be anything. It's really important to know that anything that you hold on to that's hurt you is wounding, is trauma. It could be something, a lot of people feel like their trauma is insignificant. Like this isn't enough trauma. It's not the death of a loved one, or, it's not a major, assault, but yeah, maybe you were traumatized by something simple. It seems seemingly simple, but yet it rules a big part of your life and the way that you show up in your relationships and your relationship to yourself. So trauma it can be really anything that's hurt you, and also something that can surprise you. I think it can surprise you later on in your life that, wow, this is something that is real and true for me. And so just to start with that, I think maybe Mike, you want to add a little more?
Kara, I think you said it all right there. Everything I agree with you, what you said, Kara. And one of the things that came up for me was, yes, I think of the emergency rooms, the trauma center. And, so a lot of people who are watching right now might not identify with that word trauma, so I love that term wounding. And another thing is just, I've been through some stuff. I've been through some stuff in my life. That means trauma. We're all talking about the same thing. And, I love what you said about, people thinking their trauma is insignificant. If you're watching this and you've been through anything in your life, it's valid and it's significant. Let me say that again. If you're watching this and you've been through anything in your life, it's valid and it's significant. A lot of times, sometimes we compare our trauma to others because we hear stories of people really going through something that seems like unimaginable to us. But the reality is, if I was in kindergarten and you two were in kindergarten with me and you gave me like dirty looks and that messed me up for the rest of my life, that's trauma. No one can argue with that. And so I think it's really important to understand, but things happen to us, stimulus and response. Our body's response to anything is called stress. That's our body's response to stimulus. And sometimes that stimulus is really intense and leaves a real deep impression on our mind, body, and our spirit. And we don't even know it's there sometimes. We don't even know it's there. And it's until we later discover it, as you said, by surprise, or in our behavior, as I like to say. Maybe we discover something we want to fix in our behavior, and we realize that there's some history behind a wound there that wasn't addressed. So that's kind of how I see this whole overarching subject of trauma.
Yeah, thank you. Something else that's coming up for me too in this moment is there's trauma that we've experienced, and I think there's also trauma that we've inherited. So there's sort of patterns that have been passed down generationally, maybe through socialization, but to kind of keeping with the medical perspective here a little bit too, there's scientific research, and it's more recent, but they found that there's markers for trauma on people's DNA. So there are people like survivors of the Holocaust, their children, their grandchildren are still carrying some of those markers of trauma. So, and I think there's our own story, our own experience, and then there's something else. There's something we've inherited. And I just want to point that out because sometimes we're not even aware of like the trauma. I'm kind of making this up, but this term was like this trauma drive. Like we're driven in some way and we live in some way, which is often charged by our trauma. And a lot of the time it's like to avoid a pattern. We don't want to relive. It's like, oh, I've seen that, I'm not doing it again. And so sometimes until we've looked at that trauma and done the work with that trauma, we even in the attempt to avoid it, we relive it. It's like even running from it, we relive it. So I think it's important to really recognize, how many layers deep, how deep this can go. But I also want to point out, because I think when people hear, oh, it's genetically inherited, like we're stuck, okay, this is the story of my life, in multiple ways. I've lived it, I've inherited it, I keep living it. But I just want to say, I don't think that's true. I have lived, different reorganizing of my own patterns. So sort of understanding my own trauma helps me rewrite my own path. So that's a little bit into like, why do we want to do the work? But I think it's an important piece.
Understanding my own trauma helps me rewrite my own path. That is quotable and tweetable right there. I love that. Love that.
Well, I think it's something that we've experienced, the three of us together, sort of diving in, and we've been able to, over the last year, see the growth and the shift in each other and in our own selves. And it's been kind of a beautiful, really affirming experience. Like this is the reason we're here sharing this, Trauma is valid, it is real, it is something maybe you didn't have, maybe it wasn't your choice, but it is your responsibility now that it's been handed to you to work through it, if you choose to do so, and also not alone. I think that's the important piece. You don't have to do it alone.
When you brought that up about it being inherited, I automatically went to like the African American culture because of everything that culture is still dealing with today. But I think a lot of people think, oh, well, that was so long ago. Like, why can't people just let it go? And obviously that's a completely insensitive statement, but what you said really helps me to understand sort of, it's not just what they're still dealing, with things today. I mean, but lots of stuff. So that really kind of resonated with me and helped me to kind of be understanding of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and speaking from the African American culture perspective, I agree with you. And it's been something that I've even started to recognize with all the events of this year, maybe some things that I'm carrying that I don't even realize. And I'm very intentional about my trauma, working on it every single day. So I'm excited to talk about that in a future video. But it reminds me, I'm about to get real deep now, so bear with me here, because Kara started, I'm going deeper here. The intergenerational trauma, and I'm going spiritual here, and sorry for the background noise. I'm here in New York City, so we have lots of background sounds. It brings up the word karma, actually, for me. And in the Eastern spirituality systems, they talk about karma being things that you carry through multiple lifetimes. And again, I don't want to get into the whole, like, does karma really exist or not? But for me personally, it's something I believe exists. And I actually believe when we're talking about karma and trauma, we're actually talking about the same thing. And people don't realize that, but they're slowly starting to see that, because a lot of the same quote unquote methods that are out there for healing karma are the same for healing trauma. And so if you want good karma, you got to work on your trauma.
Mike, I love that you said that, because just to talk a little bit about karma, my initial understanding of it is like I did something wrong in a past life. Not that and then now I carry that with me. But I think that's really helped sort out that piece of like, maybe it was just stuff that you brought with you that you didn't get a chance to work out. Maybe it's stuff, or maybe if you don't believe in past lives, you're carrying something genetically too that people didn't get the chance to work out. Maybe it wasn't safe to do so. So I think if you're someone watching these videos, you're someone that's really interested in doing the work, like looking at your trauma. So it's an important thing to look at. Yeah.
I love that you said that it wasn't safe to do so. I was looking up the word trauma, and if you on the internet, it'll tell you that there's like a little graph, and it says like from 1950, like the word trauma was barely used, and just skyrockets, like from like 2000, I was like 2000 on. It's been a word that's highly talked about, and I think that's like a good sign, isn't it? Like that we're like bringing that word forward, because and I know it's a loaded word, like it means a lot of different things, but yeah, I think it's important that we're talking about it, because people, in the 50s, it was you don't talk about that stuff, and it's a way, like it's oppressive,
Yeah. I think that's really well put, Jen. Really well put. Yeah.
And that's what we do. We peel apart the layers here. And so I think that's wonderful. By the way, you all are frozen, but now you've reappeared. Thank you, Zoom. The things. And by the way, 2020, this year has been traumatic, I believe, for the entire planet. And for those of you that are watching, everyone's been touched by something with 2020 in a deep way, whether it's just, change, whether you've lost someone, and my heart goes out to you if you have lost someone due to COVID-19, or just lost someone in general for whatever reason. And also the recession, and just all the different changes in the world, not being able to be in person with the people that you love, so that is traumatic. And actually, one of the things I'm going to be talking about in the later meeting today is the mental health impact of this year. Slowly, numbers are starting to come out to realize that like things are skyrocketing in people's lives with mental health. But I don't think we're really going to understand the traumatic impact of 2020 until years later. But needless to say, it's been a really intense year. And this is just an example of what some people go through every single day. 2020 for a lot of people is like, whoa, but there are many of us who've just been through stuff since birth that, 2020 isn't anything, because we've been hit with a lot more. Again, it's not invalidating 2020 for those who've been impacted by it. But I think it's really important to understand that we've all been through stuff, and we all hurt each other. That's what us humans do. We love each other, but we hurt each other. And then a lot of times it's not intentional. And I think that realization got me to realize that I was thinking about it this morning. I was like feeling guilty about recording this, because I'm like, shoot, I've caused so many people so much trauma. And, I'm sure they're probably watching thinking, okay, finally he's going to admit that. But I think that's really an important part of addressing trauma, is realize that maybe you've been traumatized, but you've also traumatized others. It doesn't make you a bad person, so I think that's really important to look at it from all those angles.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Mike. Hurt people hurt people. I don't know where that quote came from, but that is definitely so true. And that is exactly why it's so important to work with our trauma.
Wow. Powerful stuff here. So I'd like to ask you, if you're watching, can you let us know, what does trauma mean to you? We just want to get clearer on the definition. We want to hear from you, what you have to say. Please leave a comment in the box below and let us know. One of us will definitely respond. And on that note, we are going to wrap up, and we are going to be coming back with some more videos around the subject, because this is a really important topic. We're going to be talking about why it's important to process your trauma and work with it. And also, what does that actually look like? We hear about it all the time. You need to work with it, but what does that look like in the real world? So we're going to be coming back with some more videos on that. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Kara. And we will be back soon with more difficult emotions.